Okay, welcome back. It's good to have everybody back. I hope you enjoyed our keynote by our CTO, Mark Porter. I know I certainly did. It was nice to see some of the fruition of the work all the developer team and engineering teams put together. My name is Shane McAllister. I'm on the developer advocacy team, so I'm MC for the room today. And we have 3 talks left, 2 half-hour talks, and 1 15-minute lightning talk as well too. So without further ado, this talk is a Hack the MongoDB Planet. Yeah, very clickbaity title there, Dawid. But it's a great catchy title. So in this talk, Dawid Esterhuizen from MongoDB is going to go through his experience witnessing the good, the bad, and the ugly of cybersecurity configurations. Everybody's conscious of the breaches, the fines, regulations, and everything else that involves as well too. So as developers, you should know how to exploit your application. So here, Dawid is going to talk through how to exploit a vulnerable application and see how an attacker would exfiltrate your data and go through some common misconfigurations. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Dawid up onto the stage, and we look forward. We'll have some questions afterwards as well too, if there's time, so feel free. I'll be wandering around with the microphone as well too. So welcome to the stage, Dawid Esterhuizen.
Hey. Oh, hi. I've got a quick poll for you. So, who's seen Mr. Robot? Hands up. Keep your hands up. Keep them up. Keep them up. Right. Who believe of you lot that it was all fiction? Okay, so we've got quite a few realists here. Fair enough. Now, I've always thought that hacking must be harder than what they make it look like on TV. And over the past 2 years, I have spent my time exploring the world of ethical hacking. And I've found that almost anyone can hack, as long as they've got sufficient knowledge and a bit of creative thinking. Every week, we hear about another large organization that has a data breach, like the Okta breach in March this year. Or we hear about another large package that has vulnerability, like Log4j earlier in the year. Now, today, my plan is for you to see how these attacks are done. We're going to exploit a few tools or a few applications, and we will also show you how MongoDB can help you protect your data against these attacks. So, I'm David. I'm originally from South Africa, and I've been building secure, performant, and scalable applications for about 20 years now. So, over the next 25 minutes, we will see an attack on a real live application that uses MongoDB in the real world right now. We will also see attacks in all of these areas, ranging from application attacks with injections to some misconfigurations and some misconceptions. Now, these are all based on misconceptions that I've encountered with customers myself. Working in professional services, we've heard all of the justifications not to use a certain security feature. So, another quick poll. How many developers do we have? Come on. Ooh, lots. DBAs, sysadmins? No, we should definitely not use your org role as a shard key. That will end quite bad for us. So, our first stop is application development. What is the first rule of Fight Club? Oh, wait, sorry. Wrong room. What is the first rule of secure web development? Never use or never trust user input. And I will repeat that. Never trust any input from any user ever. This brings me to common misconception number 1. So, MongoDB doesn't use SQL, so I don't have to worry about SQL injection. we speak to countless developers that have this false sense of security. Now, who of you have heard of NoSQL injection? Now, the last few years, we've seen a lot of new NoSQL databases hit the market. And on the database rating engine on the internet, we can see that at the moment, NoSQL databases have about 15% of the market. MongoDB is a really large proportion of that. Now, with stats like these, attackers have started paying attention. And we've seen new tools hit the market. We have the equivalent to SQL map, which is now called NoSQL map. It allows you to automatically inject NoSQL injections into vulnerable applications and endpoints. So, enough theory. Let's hack something. So I've written a very bad authentication endpoint. It uses query strings to take the username and password, builds a query, and then just checks if the user exists. Common, right? Well, let's see what we can do with some command line tools. So first off, of course, we will start with the basics. So we'll send the correct user and password information. And we can see that we've got some strings on the server. I've added some extra logging so we can see what happens on the server. Yes, we've got a username and password. And everything's fine. So MongoDB queries are usually built with objects and arrays. Can we get those onto the server? Now, this brings me to an interesting, not very well-known query feature. Now, if you add a square bracket to your parameter there, what you will see is on the server, you get an array. Oh, that's quite useful. If we wanted to send a list of values, well, we just have to do it twice with the same parameters. And you guessed it, we get an array, a list of values on the server. That will definitely come in useful later on. So, can we get an object on there? Well, if you use any programming language out there, if we set a field name inside of the square brackets, well, we get an object on the server. Now, can you see where this is going? In SQL injection, the most basic authentication bypass that you can do is quote or 1 equals 1, double dash. Just to make sure we don't have any issues, we just comment out the rest of the query. Now, if you look at this, basically that query results to true every time. So we need to find something similar to this for Mongo. Now, there's quite a few options here, let's be honest. We love the query language, but it's quite powerful. But we're hackers. We like to use the easy way. And we need to remember this, remember? So, if your password is actually set, and we check whether or not your password is bigger than nothing, well, it is. It's always bigger than nothing. That was easy. We've just bypassed your authentication. Now, what I want to point out here, this is not a vulnerability in the database. This is a vulnerability in the application. So, let's be honest. This is kind of obvious, and everyone can use this. And we know we won't do this. So, and to be honest, we use, post requests, etc. But let's take it a step further. Now, I've written a tiny little Python script that just iterates over some characters and plays a little with regex, and then does some blind NoSQL injection. Now, by doing that, we can pull some data out of the database. Now, if your passwords were clear text, which Definitely it should not be. This could be bad. So what we are doing, but there's also other data in there. But let's do some TV hacking. So we kick off our exploit and we're off, and we are just iterating over every possible character. When we find the character, we just move on to the next character. This was 13 lines of code, and it took me about 10 minutes to write. With no SQL map, this could be even easier. So, now I hear you. I see you all out there. Java developers, SQL developers, or C# developers, I see you. You all think that your application's safe. Well, you'd be surprised to know that you're still vulnerable. Yes, it requires a very interesting approach to query building. But considering we've just done this for 50 years in SQL systems, why would this not happen? So, in 2021, a real, quite popular open source chat server had this vulnerability identified. I used this exploit, which used exactly the same regex blind injection. And what they were doing is they were pulling out the reset token for a user. Now, once they've reset the username, they were able to escalate privileges for the user, and he would become an admin. Once an admin, you could do this really cool thing, which is called integrations. Now, integrations is just a fancy word for saying running code on your server. Now, if I can run code on your server, you've been pwned. That's just how it is. So, do we all agree? We will never trust any input from any user, ever, right? Cool, so we've addressed the obvious entry point. So, next up, there is one actual attack that we can never protect against. Humans get hacked every day. A recent study showed that 98% of security attacks make use of social engineering. 70% of data breaches is caused by social engineering. And there are 75 times more phishing websites than there are malware websites. That's really scary numbers. It's only a matter of time before it's one of your networks. At some point, some phishing, spam, or clever calls, someone might just expose the wrong information or click on the wrong link, and you might have a new visitor in your network. Now remember, when a good hacker breaks into your system, you might actually know about it. If a great hacker breaks into your system, you will only know if they want you to know. So, this brings me to common misconception number 2. I don't need authentication because my database will always be running in a secure network. Well, let's talk about the most basic security feature, authentication. If you can use Scramshaw, you can use Kerberos, LDAP, X509. If you do not lock the front door, someone will walk in and take your data. It will happen. Now, Pete and Sarah in accounting received a very interesting email. It was actually an invoice, and they opened up the Word document, and sadly, it was more of a macro Trojan, and you guessed it, you've got a new visitor in your network. He starts scanning the network and he sees there is an open MongoDB port. And, okay, so we see there is a database. Can we log in? There is actually no authentication. And you've been pwned. we've got your data. It was that simple. Now I see the sysadmins here. I see you. You're here thinking MongoDump will just block MongoDump. Well, Mongo Shell and the original Mongo Shell both are very, very powerful tools. This 7 lines of code can dump your whole database for you. No MongoDump needed. And you've been pwned again. Yeah. So, do we all agree authentication is a minimum requirement for every database out there? Right. So, we've done some research. We've now put our data behind safe, behind lock and very strong password. We've done some research. We've now gone, okay, we're putting all of our service accounts in a secrets vault so that people can't just read it out of the config files in the application. So we're safe, right? Well, this brings me to common misconception number 3. We don't need TLS. Mongo uses a binary protocol, and it's in a private network. Now, we've just spoken about the private network, so we'll leave it there. So, this time, we will let Pete and Sarah off the hook, but sadly, Ali installed a new game on his iPad over the weekend from an unofficial store, and you guessed it, we've got a new visitor in our network. This time, he does a bit of a scan. He sees we've got a Mongo server running, and he checks, and there is authentication. So, cool, we've stopped him. Well, he can go and brute force it, but that's a lot of work, remember? We're hackers, we like the easy way. So, we start sniffing your network, and we see there is a lot of packets for the MongoDB server. We can always just intercept those and send them to the attacker machine. Now, once I've got your data on my machine, I just need to know my tools very well. T-Shark or Wireshark both can help me access a PCAP file. And if I output it as JSON, I can actually use JQ to just manipulate it. Love JQ, best tool ever. Now, this must be at least a little bit hard to read, right? It's beaten as hexadecimal code. Well, there's this really useful tool online called CyberChef. It has a lot of decoders, one of which is from Bison. And this time, you've been pwned again. Well, no username even required. I've got your data by just looking at your network. So, do we all agree every database in our system should have TLS? Yes? Right. So we've got the application safe, we've got the network safe, we've got the passwords correct and safe. Who uses encryption at rest? Right. Love it. Now, another question for those same people. Who believe that it can save you against any attack? Well, really? No one? So why are you using it? Anyway, so let's look at common misconception number 4. Encryption at rest will save me against any attack, especially against the hackers. Well, this is kind of true, but only if they get hold of your data in an offline state, like after a decommission or drive theft. Now, a study in 2014 found that 78% of drives that were sold for reuse after decommission still had data on them. 23% of them had social security numbers on them. 21% of them had financial data on them. This is a problem. Now, we all know attackers can recover files after they've been deleted. And as you can see, you've been pwned again. because you were using a key file for your encryption at rest. This time, you've been pwned by a drive you threw in the bin 6 months ago. That's not good. So, do we all agree we will always use KMOP servers when we're using encryption at rest? Yeah? Now, one thing I want you to understand is if an attacker makes it onto your system when it's running, all bets are off. They can get your data, no matter what system you are using. This brings me to a new attack vector, which is quite scary. This is something that affects businesses and is one of the biggest risks for them right now. 70% of organizations are seeing an increase in this, insider attacks. People that are coming from inside the business. And it takes up to 200 days to detect it. 38% of global businesses have been affected by these. That is, again, very scary numbers. Now, Jen, she was approached by one of our competitors, and she's decided to take our company database with her. And, well, she has SSH access to the host. So what she will do is she doesn't want to really be detected, so she doesn't want to use her credentials. But we've got all of the security in place, remember? Now, she can use a few options. She can dump the memory and get what's in the cache. That's a lot of work. She could also dump the memory and try and go and look for the keys. It's also a lot of work. Get the master key and get a key, still a lot of work. Alternatively, she could just use the key file. It's there. It's used to communicate between servers. Well, she has the access. She could just dump the data. And again, you've been pwned. Insider attacks are some of the hardest to protect against. And this is because of the level of knowledge and access of employees. Now, one thing you might have noticed here is it seems like nobody is safe. And that's what I'm trying to show you. If someone makes it onto your server while it's running, all bets are off, especially if they've got root access. Now, this is where client-side field-level encryption comes in and can give you a helping hand. Because we are encrypting the data on the application server before it's sent to the database, not even your DBAs can read the data. The keys that are being used are also in a key management system. So that is also pretty secure. So this time I want you to say this with me. We will use CSFLE for all sensitive information. It's a little long, I know, it's a little long. I know there's now a CSFLE 2, but hey. So, let's take a step back. Let's be honest, security configuration is a full-time job, and you already have a job. MongoDB Atlas provides a database which is secured by default. You have to have a username and password. You're always required to use TLDS, and there's always network whitelists and access lists that should be used. This is a database secured by default. So, the zero trust management used by Atlas, which comply with all of the acronyms, HIPAA and PCI DSS and all of those, means that this database is not accessible from a compromised network. Now, let's think about the following. If you put your applications outside of Atlas using client-side field-level encryption, and you put your data inside of Atlas in a default or a database secured by default. You've added another barrier between the insiders and your data. This means in our previous example, Jen would have had some information, but not the important information. Now I want to leave you with one thought. This does not protect us against injection. Protect against injection. But please use MongoDB Atlas wherever possible. If you cannot use MongoDB Atlas, please remember these 5 things. Never, ever, ever trust user input. Always use authentication. Always use TLS. Always use a KMIP server for your encryption at rest. And encrypt your data, especially your sensitive information, with client-side field-level encryption. I hope I've given you something to think about. Thank you.
That was great, David. Thank you very much. I know I gave out to you about your clickbait title, but I think it was very well worth it. So we have some time for some questions. Is there any questions in the audience? There was a lot raised there. Yep.
So thinking a previous life, it was prepared statements was the way to help on the injection front. Is there equivalent on Mongo?
Yeah.
When is there going to be an equivalent on Mongo?
Good point. Yes, it's probably something we need to work on. Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, any others in the room? You brought up client-side field-level encryption. Is the field queryable then, if you have that in place?
That is correct, yeah. As Mark actually said earlier, the original version of client-side field-level encryption, you could do direct matches, and the new version, we're working on the partial matches, prefix and postfix, etc. So you can still query on even encrypted fields, which makes it really useful. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. We have a question here.
So with the field level encryption, can I create index on that field after encrypted?
Yes.
Can it be like normal field after it encrypted?
Yes. So even if you've got a client-side field level encryption field, it can still be indexed. That's correct, yeah.
Excellent. We've time for one more question. Any more questions in the room? You're all given a lot to think about, I think, going back and seeing how you're doing your own things. David, that was superb. Thank you so much for that. Round of applause, please. Thank you.